Welcome. Are you okay?
I'm quite busy at the moment.
Yeah. So you should be.
Yeah, but I'm getting. They're working me hard, but I'm getting through it.
So introduce us to 21-year-old Gary Stevenson walking onto the floor on your first day at Citibank on June the 30th, 2008.
So 21-year-old me had just cut all of his hair off. That was when the lasting haircut decision was made. I just bought a new pair of pointy shoes from Topman and a new set of non-iron shirts, which was convenient. I'd done my last exam at LSE was on a Thursday, so I guess that would have been June 26th. It was called MA 303 Chaos in Dynamical Systems, and my first day at Citibank was on the Monday. They'd asked me like, what day do you want to start, and I was like, well, my last exam's on Thursday. I'll start on Monday because I need to buy those pointy shoes, basically. And what can I say? Young Gary was very, very determined to be successful and make a lot of money, and he was quite a competitive young man, and of course a little bit of an unusual space, perhaps a little bit of a novelty. Yeah, Gary the geezer.
You grew up in Ilford. You grew up in the shadow of those towers in Canary Wharf. What did they represent to you when you were outside? Because you're gifted at maths. You can see a path ahead of you. Tell me the sort of the role of those as a kid, looking at them and wondering sort of what went on in there.
So I always remember there's a friend of mine called Richard Parazram who gave a talk when we were in primary school. So we were probably like 9 or 10, and he gave a speech about I think it's called One Canada Square, which is the main Canary Wharf building with the pyramid on top. And he said, and if you go there, you're allowed to go to the top and walk on the roof. I remember him saying that when I was a kid. They went up when we were kids, and we could see them from where we lived, in the distance. And I just thought that's where I'm going to be, basically, and in a very sort of naive, childish way. But I was very good at maths as a kid, and when you're very talented at school, you kind of naively assume that's what's going to happen. I remember when I was in reception, my reception teacher, I must have been 4 or 5, Miss Winus was her name, said, Gary, you're very intelligent. When you grow up, you can be anything you want to be. What do you want to be? And I said, Miss, I want to be a footballer. And she said, you can't be a footballer. And I guess from then on, you just assume you're going to be in the banks, and it's one thing I think was very significant is because it was in East London, it was like new, and it was to be won, and it could be ours,
You're in LSE, the exams. It becomes clear that there are obstacles in your way that perhaps you hadn't realised were there. And you get your break internship on the back of something called, which is the name of the book. Explain to people.
The trade that was run by Citibank up until the 2008 financial crisis, where they used to hire one trader a year to the card game. And you know what's funny about this? Somebody said to me the other day, that's very irresponsible of them. One trader a year through a card game. 50 traders a year through CV cover letter, which is based basically on like how good your clarinet is. Yeah. And like they're hiring one trader a year through a game, which is actually like much better measurement of becoming like extremely good traders at Citibank. But anyone who's this absurd stage where you're in your second year, so you don't have any exam grades yet, so you don't really have any way to prove that you're good, and everyone has to send 50 CVs and cover letters, and obviously everyone else, everyone else at LSE is basically the son of a billionaire dictator of a third world country, right? And they've like been prepped from 2 years old to have these unbelievable CVs, while I was fluffing pillows in a sofa shop next to a sewage works in a commercial estate in East London, right? And you just realise, I think weirdly, what I was going to say was you just realise it's just like, it's fucked up and it's broken and it's unfair. But actually, 19-year-old me, the way that 19-year-old me was, didn't even think that for a second. It's like, all right, fine, next. What's the next way in? What's the next way in? So I I started to be really aggressive at uni and started to sort of challenge the lecturers and I wanted to be noticed because I thought, well, if somebody notices me, maybe because I knew I was really smart. Well, that's what I thought, I was really smart, and it worked. Somebody came up to me, a kid from Grimsby, what's he called, Luke Blackwood in the book, came up to me and said, Citibank I won Trader You through a game, and the game is a card game. It's supposed to basically represent trading. Really, at the end of the day, it's a maths game, a kind of a betting poker style game, but it's not poker. It's made up game, which again meant it's there to be won, right? It's there to be won.
And the central insight of the game, as I understood it, you'll explain it 100 times better than me, is that the guys around the table have to. You're asking prices all the time, and you're trying to find out the gap between prices being offered and the prices you're willing to pay. And the kind of central insight of the game is actually the value of the thing is meaningless. It's all about the spread and making it as big as possible. And this seems like a kind of a key insight that you carry forward into trading.
Yeah, there's, in a weird, it's nice to start. You know, I wasn't initially going to put that in the book, but then I went and I read Liar's Poker, and then I realised everyone's going to want to know how I got into it. And then I thought, you're such an idiot for not wanting to put this in because it's such a great microcosm of the whole thing. Basically, you've all got cards. Some of you've got high cards, some of you've got low cards, and you're essentially betting on what the sum of the cards are. So it's kind of a bluffing style game. But then what is really interesting about this game is the way that LSE University economists play this game. So some of you will have studied maths and statistics, and maybe some of you will have worked in finance. Whenever you play a game like this, you've got some private information and everyone's got their card. Mathematicians, and especially statisticians, will immediately do this thing, which is calculating the expected value, which is a mathematical thing you can do, and it kind of tells you what the correct way to play the game is. And I knew what the rules of the game were going to be. We could talk about that. So, and I had immediately knew that they would do this. And what that means is, if you have a low card, you will start betting a low value because you have this private information, and your expected value will be quite low. And if you have a higher card, you will start betting high because you have this different private information and your expectation is quite high. And I knew that everyone would do that because I know how economic students think. And it's actually a very stupid thing to do, right? Because essentially, you know, you've got a -10 and you're betting 40, and you've got a 20 and you're betting 60. I can just buy at 40 and sell at 60, like 100 times, and make basically infinite profit while you're just like busy doing some statistical calculation, basically. And I think this is actually a really nice microcosm for what is kind of wrong with our economy as a whole, which is it's run by these kind of like technocratic mathematicians that have been so trained, so sort of brainwashed by this maths and numbers, that they're actually unable to look at the bigger picture and say, well, what's really happening here? So I think it's, and you know, another sort of nice irony of it is it's another great story of a bunch of posh rich guys kind of underestimating me because I was wearing an Echo hoodie with a rhino on it.
As I said in the introduction, a lot of the action of the book takes place on the sort of the carpet, the Diet Coke, the headphones, the screens, the telephones, the shouting. Like that is the world of this book, and it's very, very vivid. And I wanted to ask you about writing that. When you came to sit down to write the book, did you have records, emails, diaries? Was this just a sort of, did it all come back to you as anything? Tell me about how you reconstructed that kind of atmosphere.
I think at that time of my life, I remember very vividly. It was such a... I'm 37 now. You know, first time I walked onto the Citibank trading floor, I was just turned 20. And it's this unbelievably vast room, huge, vast, you know, and all these guys with these massive screen walls. And there's, you know, I really wanted to... I got offers for this book based just on the trading game section. Hadn't even gotten to the trading floor. And I basically told everybody, like, no, I'm not going to pitch this until I've written the trading floor. I want to get on the trade. And I don't even want to commit to writing this book until I've convinced myself I can write. I can bring you into that space. And there's this one scene of me, like, waking up at home and taking a shower in this, like, using this hose from Argos. and getting on the train, going to the trading floor, coming out of Canary Wharf, this big station, and walking onto the trading floor and coming into that space. And it was easy to write because it was quite such an intense period of my life. And so quite in hindsight, I didn't realise it at this time, like weirdly traumatic. And you have, I think, one thing this book got me thinking about a lot was ambition, and why are ambitious people ambitious, and where it comes from. And it got me thinking about myself and other people. And I think that we laud ambition in our society, but I actually think, especially extreme ambition, very often comes from trauma. And I think I was kind of living it out. So writing it was really just reliving these things, and there was such vivid characters and such vivid times to me that it was never. It was sometimes difficult emotionally to write, but it was never difficult to put myself back in the time.
If you haven't read the book yet, and it's not out till tomorrow, so you probably haven't read the book yet. You'll just hoover it up. The writing's really exceptional, and it's really kind of coming from somewhere very kind of raw and real. I'm gonna ask Gary to read his description of Rupert, one of the kind of the main characters in the book, and your first sort of encounter with him on the, in your early days.
So this is Rupert Hobhouse, who is an amazing person, and this is when I first met him. For my part, while Rupert had scanned me, I'd had much time to look at his face. It was at once babyish and concerningly stern, at once handsome and unnecessarily fat. He must have been in his early 30s. Thick, black-rimmed glasses framed his eyes beneath a professionally coiffed brown quiff. He had the aura of a man whose parents had dropped him off unexpectedly at boarding school when he was just 6 years old and had not picked him up until he was 21. I would later find that this was not actually far from the truth. He had the muscular, verging on fat physique of a man who had been well-fed for many years, possibly from birth, as if his body was struggling to come up with new ways to use all the nutrition. It was a physique that was at certain points straining at the seams somewhat, as was his clearly expensive shirt. It spoke of a capacity for violence.
I mean, it's good, right? Okay, so this seems like kind of second nature to you, or kind of normalized to you, but there is this fact that you walk onto the trading floor and no one tells you what to do. Yeah. I can't get my head around that. That just seems bizarre in any profession, let alone such a lucrative and kind of desperately sought after profession. Yeah. But that no one, I can't say it again, no one tells you what to do. You walk onto this floor and there's no, you just, what?
Yeah. It's, I called it in the book the nothing, which is you want to get to this place your whole life, and you don't date any girls for the whole of high school because you're doing maths in a corner somewhere, and then you go to LSE and you write 75 cover letters for banks you've never heard of, and somehow you scrape your way in, and you walk onto the trading floor wearing your most expensive suit. You go and you shake hands with all the traders, and then they just totally ignore you, and they give you no work to do, they give you no seat to sit in, and they give you no desk to work at. And you are expected to figure out what to do. Because I was at LSE, I knew this, Everybody knew, and you...
Is it deliberate? Is it hazing? Like, what's happening here? Like, what's the...
There is an element of hazing. There is also... They don't care about you. They don't care about you. What have you got to offer them? And I thought, one of the big... underlying message I want to get across for the book is what it does to people, to individuals, when they make playing the game the center of their soul. And, this guy Rupert, he's 33, or 32. I walk in, I'm 20 years old, right? I'm wearing like a suit from Next, you know what I mean? And I look like I've been sent there to ask a work experience or something, And why would he talk to me? He's busy. He's got his job to do. He's making money. He's playing the game. So I think actually there is an element of hazing about it, but there's also just like a very simple dynamic of power, which is I'm here to make money, you're fucking 20 years old, fuck off.
And when do you realise that they don't know what they're doing either?
That is a good question. So we spoke about this a little bit before. I've got like a kind of rule which I live by, which repeatedly gets me in trouble and I should probably stop doing, which is that when somebody uses a word I don't understand, I ask them what that word means. Just don't do that, because probably they don't know either. And the trading floors are horrific places for this. Like, people just use like 50% of the words that I use are words you don't understand. So you'll be like, okay, yeah, like what's PPI? You know what I mean? What does it mean? You know, what's PMI? You know, and this one guy, Rupert, I asked him, like, something came out. You know, in fact, he said to me, what's PMI? Because these numbers come out like at random time. A number will like pop up from a corner, and you have to know for some reason what the number is. And I don't know what PMI is. And then I sort of replied back to him, but like, what is PMI? He meant like, what is it, 77 or something? And I meant on a more sort of conceptual level. And that he would be, and he said to me, you don't know what PMI is? You don't even know what it is? And I'd be like, no. And he'd be like, it's a disgrace. Go find out what PMI is and come back to me. And that's when you kind of think, wait a minute. You know, he knows what PMI is, but he doesn't know what PMI is. And so there's a character in the book called Snoopy who I would have loved to give him more time to. I love Snoopy. He's going to come to my friends and family launch tomorrow, and he's a lovely guy. And he was sort of the one non-insane guy on the trading floor. And I spent my first day on the trading floor, and I spoke to two people who are both probably psychopaths in their own kind of ways. And I didn't have any idea what anyone was talking about. And at the end of the day, I didn't have a seat, but so I kind of like sat on Snoopy's filing cabinet. And I went to Snoopy and I said, Snoopy, can I ask you something? And he was like, what? And I was like, listen, I spoke to JB and I spoke to Rupert, and I didn't fucking understand the word that they said. And Snoopy goes to me, don't worry about that, mate. You see this guy behind me? And there's this kind of like swarthy, handsome-looking Italian behind me. And he said, listen, that guy's worked here for 3 years. He doesn't have a fucking clue what he's talking about. He doesn't know anything. He turned up 3 hours late for work the other day. And when the boss asked him why we were late, all he did is shrug and say, Swedish New Year. And he still makes millions for the bank every year. If he can do it, anyone can do it. And I looked at him and I kind of thought, all right, let's give it a go. You're
working on a desk called the short-term interest rates desk, or do people say STIRT? I mean, so it's
STIRT.
They say STIRT. And an unfashionable kind of corner of the trading floor, which suddenly becomes immensely profitable during these years. And forgive my sort of butchering of what happened here, but basically, the world was desperate for dollars, and Citibank was in a position through foreign exchange swaps, where you were enabled to lend dollars through a relatively simple trade, or you make it sound like that. Suddenly, the desk starts to become immensely profitable.
Yeah. So it was. I started in end of June 2008, which people probably recognise as like 3 months before the Lehman crisis. And I think maybe people assume that like the Lehman crisis was like a terrible time to be a banker, and we all went home and just like dressed in sackcloth and ashes and self-flagellated. What was weird is my specific desk, just my desk, and there might have been a couple other desks, but it's especially my desk, starts making these unbelievably enormous amounts of money. And one of my jobs as like the desk junior is to go around at the end of the day and ask everybody their P&L. So P&L, if anyone doesn't know, it's profit and loss, and it's the only thing that matters in the world. And you suddenly see these guys who, you know, they were kind of obviously like social miscreants, like who they'd been on their desk because like they couldn't get any better job. Suddenly they start making like tons of money, and you know, like some of my mates lost their job in Lehman, and you know, I would like to say that I sat and thought about the immorality of the world, but I was just like thinking, how the fuck are these guys making so much money, and how can I make some of this money, basically? And you're just sort of running around. There's a great scene in the book. There's a character called Spengler, who's a kind of, he's a South African giant, basically, and he's not the most socially aware guy. And at one point, he does one trade and he makes $2 million for the bank. And he jumps into kind of a lunge like this, like this. And the boss grabs him and says, "What are you doing?" And those guys are losing their jobs this week, you know. But we didn't care. And I would like to tell you that we didn't care in spite of the fact that they were losing their jobs. And we didn't care because they were losing their jobs. The fact that those guys are losing their jobs is a total irrelevance to us. Our job is to make money.
What's your best kind of analysis of what was driving this hive of activity on the trading floor every day? All these brains, you know, albeit maybe they're imitating each other, maybe some people have, you know, are celebrating Swedish New Year, whatever, but, you know, this kind of mass of sort of brains and intellect. What was driving all of that activity? What was the purpose behind it? Is it your sense that this is just individual gain? Everyone's just looking at their P&L numbers on their computer, and it's that sort of harnessing of sort of hundreds of sort of individual kind of greed that's sort of driving all of this stuff? Yeah. Or was there ever a sort of a sense of what the bank was, the purpose of banking? Like we're good for capitalism. We're kind of greasing the wheels of the world economy. Like what was like? Because I work in journalism. You know, journalism sort of there'll be a sort of spoken purpose, and then there'll be individual purposes. You can have both things. I'm just interested in that kind of interplay. What's your sense of what was kind of actually fueling all of this kind of activity?
Can I give you like a really like fancy wanky answer?
I'd love that.
So you know this quote by Voltaire: "If there was no God, we would have to invent him."
Yeah.
So I think. You know, we live in this post-religious society, and hardly anybody goes to church anymore, and nobody's religious. I think there is a kind of a truth to this idea that humans need, in some sense, a God. And it doesn't need to be like a dude on a cloud or whatever. But I think humans need to believe that something is more important, that there is something above. And I think that the death of the traditional Western God has created this kind of a void. And I think it's kind of obvious that what has filled that void is money for most people, not everybody. So I think there's a kind of a quasi-religiousness, but not in the sense that you said that we are greasing the wheels of capitalism. It's not so socially minded as that. I think it's kind of the logical endpoint of like ideas of Western individualism, which is that actually you, as an individual, you, Sam, have a responsibility, and your moral responsibility is to make as much money as you can. And I think that that's a good in itself. Yeah, there's a passage in the book which I think is quite nice. This sort of like, it's like almost like a small poetic, like a poem chapter, which is about the hypnotizing nature of money, which is when I have like when I first start making money as a trader, and I'm sort of counting the money up, and my life is kind of like slipping into the background, and the life becomes the numbers. And I think that when I say man needs God, I think that individual humans need a sense. And I think that almost everyone has this. It might be their fucking football club. It's very often their family. Everything's for that. Everything's for that. And, you know, there's a great character in the book called who I love deeply, insane. And he is a multi-millionaire, enormously wealthy person at the time that I meet him. And he tries to ingratiate himself to me by making me look at a series of 15 pictures of women in bikinis. And he must be worth £10 million. He's got a beautiful, massive house, beautiful family, never goes into that house, never sees that family. Why? It's because that is God. And, you know, the opening scene of the book is so it's not spoiler for anyone, is me being like quite aggressively threatened about I'm trying to leave. And I think the only way you can understand that is leaving is a crime against God, you know. And I think that it's, if you take away man's sense of moral purpose, they'll find a new one. And I think it's not about capitalism. Yeah. This is about it's about kind of selfishness as religion.
Tell me about how money changed you and changed your life?
It's a big question. I was obviously like, I mean, the first thing to say is that I was very poor growing up. And that in itself is, anyone who's, I'm sure there'll be people who have experienced poverty growing up, that in itself, for most people, becomes a defining part of your character. And I wanted to make money, really, really, really wanted to make money. And but I had no idea how much money was being made in the city. And there's one scene which I think is very moving, you can say what you think of it, which is my first like big bonus in the city, which ended up being like way, way more than I'd been expecting. And I think people maybe find this hard to empathise with when you just tell the story, and you kind of really need to read it in the book. But the money that I was given, and I just turned 23, was such an incomprehensibly enormous amount of money for me that, of course, I knew on a logical level that it was good, you know. Yeah. But looking back, it was really clear that I had a shock reaction, and then I have this memory. You know, that was I recount.
In the book, it reads as psychologically devastating in the book.
Yeah, I recount it as memory, and you know, I remember the scene where I received that bonus so vividly. You know, it's from memory, and then I'm just going through my memory, and then there's a gap, and then the next memory is I'm sitting on the desk, and I was working with this guy Billy, who is sort of kind of idol of mine, and he's from a working class background, and I've got a lot of love for this guy. He's kind of a father figure. I'm sitting on the desk, and I feel like I'm going to start crying. And you know it's absurd. And then this guy realises that. So he comes around between me and the other traders, and he sort of leans in and says, go sit outside. Go sit outside. And then there's another gap, and then I'm sitting outside. And for those who know Canary Wharf, there's like the central square, these 3 big skyscrapers with a kind of grassy patch in the middle. And my next memory, I'm sitting on this grassy patch. It's January, and I'm not wearing any coat or anything. I've forgotten to take any of them out. And I'm just sitting, and there's like a little triangle of sunlight where the sun's come through. And I'm just thinking of all these thoughts. Think of my dad, how hard my dad worked. And then you think there's this, I think of this guy, Ibran Khan, who I used to go to school, primary school. And his dad was disabled, he used to sleep on the sofa. And how poor they were, and how nice, how kind they were to me. And I think of another guy called Muzammil, who come over from Pakistan when we were like 10, and couldn't say any words other than his own name, Muzammil. And just used to do cartwheels all lunchtime, shouting the word Muzammil. And you just think, what the fuck is this world that we live in such deep poverty, and these unbelievable amounts of money are just dropped on people's heads? And
did it place a gap between you and your family and your friends?
Yeah, well, I was speaking the other day with Maddie, who's sitting in the corner, about this scene. So I thought I was going to make 100 grand. And I think if I'd made 100 grand, I would have gone and sort of been like, oh, yeah, let's get beers in. Yeah. You know, I wasn't a big drinker, but, you know. The amount of money was so much, I kind of knew immediately on some level I couldn't tell anyone. But I obviously had like a quite deep emotional need to tell someone because this thing had happened. Yeah. And the next scene is me talking to my girlfriend about it. And I see immediately the shock reaction in her. That was the shock reaction in me. And then you kind of know, like, fuck, like, I can't tell anyone, but you still need to, so then I tell my friends. And then you see, like, as soon as you say it, you know, you've changed permanently your relationship with some of your closest friends. Yeah. And then you just think, like, fuck me, like, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me, and I basically can't talk about it.
You pick up very quickly that you can be a successful, profitable trader by quickly sort of cottoning on to what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. But to be, you know, a great trader and to stand out, you have to find out. You have to go against the crowd. You have to be a contrarian. You have to find a pattern that no one else has spotted. And the moral heart of the book is you figuring out a trade that's going to make you a lot of money, but is revealed to you as a kind of a devastating sort of insight into our economy and our society. Can you explain to people what that what that trade was and how you were able to see it and other people weren't?
Yeah, so I guess the lead up to this is, at first I started copying people. It's so naturally human when you think about it. You go into the space, you're a kid, people are successful, you copy. It's just like what you do. And it works really well at first, and then like I get smashed basically. And not only do I get smashed, it's humiliating to get smashed when you're copying, because it highlights the fact that you never knew what the fuck you were doing in the first place, basically. Yeah. And I think that's kind of like, in a weird way, like one of my sort of first big steps to becoming a man, in a weird way. I don't think I was quite there at the time, but you know, you go through university, how much of your young life is copying? And how often, I don't know if it's different in creative disciplines, but you're copying. And then suddenly, and I would have been 23, you realise it's not enough to copy. You can't defend yourself by copying. You need understanding, and you can't copy understanding. I think it's one, you know, I can't teach you to trade. If people always ask me, teach me to trade, I can't, it's not possible. I can help you, but you need to understand. And there's this great scene with Billy, this sort of, my sort of Scouse idol, where he basically says, I start bringing my textbooks into the office, and this guy allows me to do it one day, he allows me to do it twice, then he just, one day just slaps the textbooks in my hand into the bin and just says, what the fuck are you doing? How fucking old are you, mate? You think you're a fucking kid? Is this like fucking Jackanory to you, mate? If you want to understand what's happening, go home and ask your mum about a financial situation. Walk down the high street. You know, look at all the fucking homeless people under the bridge. Look at the advertisements on the tube. Ask your friends about their financials. Ask your friends' mums. And he says, you need to understand what's happening. And I describe that in the book as the most important thing I ever heard, basically. And you start asking them, and you see that everyone's fucked, basically. And I think this is one of my sort of big advantages coming from a poor background. If you think about it, there's this amazing irony about a trading floor, because you have a room full of like 200 people betting on the economy, and barely one of them has ever had a fucking conversation with someone who wasn't rich. Yeah. It's quite amazing when you think about it. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's actually like a massive opportunity, because these guys, how can they really know what's happening in the economy? So, and you know, I bounce this around a bit, and how can everybody be poor? And then we have 2011, when you suddenly realise not only are all the people bankrupt, but all the governments are bankrupt as well. And you kind of bounce this idea around, how can all the people and all the governments be bankrupt, as if we live on like a desolate planet with nothing on it? And you know, I have this sort of, one day I have this sort of realisation of what the problem is. And are we going to do the reading on this one? Or? Yeah. Yeah?
When you get to... Yeah, do you want to do the reading first?
Oh, maybe the reading explains. I think this is the moment we've got to it now.
I like it. I'll find the page.
Sam chose this reading, but it's very good.
I mean, you wrote it, so you can choose where. But that's what I thought. But go with what feels right. But you'll need your microphone.
All right. So this is when I was trying to figure out who the fuck had the money. I looked to the left of me. No. What should we do? Where should I go from? Hold up.
You could go from
here we go.
Yeah.
And that was it, I think. That was the moment that it hit me. Surrounded by millionaires and sandwiches. I looked to the left of me. Pink shirt, white, sky blue. I looked to the right of me. White shirt, pink. Ooh, pinstripes. Don't see much of that nowadays. There in string, sewn into a collar. 4 letters. AIEQ. Who the fuck's surname begins with a Q? Millionaires. Every single one of them. And me too. What about me? I'd be a millionaire before long. It was us. It was us, wasn't it? We were the balance. We were the boys who'd be richer than our fathers in a world of children who'd be poor. We were the ones with the growing bank balances that balanced the Italians' debt. We were the ones receiving the interest on Aidan's mum's mortgage that Aidan himself was now having to pay back to us. And our children, maybe my children, maybe they would own the house that Assad's mum sold, and the rent from that house, and the interest from the Italian government. Maybe our children could lend that back out to Assad's own children, and then we'd own the house and the debt as well. And it would grow. That's what compound interest does. We would use the money from the assets to buy the rest of the assets. You'd sell your assets to us to pay your mortgage, to pay your rent, to pay it to us. That's how it would go. It would get worse and worse. It would grow out of control. It wasn't a crisis of confidence. It wasn't the fucking of the banking system. It wasn't an exogenous shock to consumption savings preferences. It was inequality. Inequality that would grow and get worse until it dominated and killed the economy that contained it. It wasn't temporary. It was terminal. It was the end of the economy. It was cancer. And I knew what that meant. It meant I had to buy green euro dollars.
I mean, we should give that a round of applause because it's fantastic. So you're correct in your analysis. The money starts to pile up for the bank and for you, although in complicated ways. But you, the figure of you in the book at this point is you're wearing trainers with holes in them, you're wearing a hoodie, you're coming into work before everyone else, you're putting your headphones in, hoodie up, you're not really talking to anybody, you're getting courted by other banks, you're insisting on meeting them in Nando's and just paying your half. You're clearly difficult, you're obstreperous, you're this kind of complicated colleague who's sort of racking up huge amounts of money. No one's asking you quite how you're doing it. To the reader, how would you describe your state of mind during this period?
Complicated. I think the best way to describe it is I had machinized myself. I had become the game. Like I was so good at the game, and I was so obsessed with the game. Yeah, I think in a sense, all of us, there's a temptation for all of us in life to focus on the things we are good at in life and to neglect the things we are bad at. And ever since I was a kid, I was good at games, and I was good at maths, and I was good at numbers. And I probably was not the best at human interaction, let's say. And we live in a society that tells young people, especially young men, you are the money that you make. And it's wise to lock yourself in a room and study all fucking day if it's going to get you a job that makes you a millionaire. And it doesn't really matter if you ignore your friends and family, if you're making millions of pounds a year, because it's worth it. And there's one line in the book which not a lot of people pick up on, which I think is quite important, which is there's a trader I work with, he's kind of really obviously having a mental breakdown. And his name's JB. And I go to Snoopy, fuck, do you think JB's all right? Like, should we do something? And Snoopy says, don't worry about JB. He's the richest person I personally know. And I think that really happened. And I think this, I get this, you read the book, it's pretty obvious I had a breakdown. Yeah. And I, at the very least, had a very serious depression. And
you seem tormented.
Yeah, but if all of my friends thought, I can't believe how great Gary's life is, based on nothing more than how much money I was making, which is, and I still get it today, you know what I mean? I write an art, when I talk about, I had a breakdown in banking, oh, poor you made £1 million, boo-hoo, and this is money as God, you know what I mean? It's as if people cannot conceptualize that it is possible to simultaneously make a lot of money and be unhappy. And I'll tell you one thing that I think is really interesting. Right? So
but do you think the nature of your conclusion, you were making money in a specific way. Yeah. You were making money on the most dire reading of landscape.
Yeah,
which in particular your friends and family and community were just on the receiving end of.
Yeah.
Do you think that played into what was happening?
I think this was kind of the worm in the heart that you don't know it's there at first, and it's just like it's just niggling. And you know, well, I didn't do this intentionally, but what starts happening is I start getting like unbearable pains in my heart, basically, and I don't know where it's coming from. And I didn't grow up in an environment that says you have an obligation to take care of your society. That's not the culture that I was raised in. I was raised in like get rich or die trying, 50 Cent, this kind of thing. And that made sense when I was poor. And very suddenly, I went from being really a very poor person to being a multimillionaire, surrounded by other multimillionaires, making a huge amount of money betting on the collapse of society. And it might seem obvious, you and me sit here now, that person has an obligation to help society. But if you go and ask people who work in trading now, why Gary quit, they'll say, because he's fucked up in his head and he's got a problem and he couldn't hack it. This is a big part of it. When I lived in Japan, I quit when I was in Japan.
Yep.
And I start going to these random cafes and telling people my story, and they say, oh, that's great, you're quitting to try and help society, that's great. When I tell Japanese people I'm quitting to try and help society, that's great. When I say that in England, very often they say, but you're making like £1 million a year, why did you quit? And it's like, well, I think society's going to collapse, so you try and stop it. And they're like, yeah, but £1 million a year. And it's sort of, I think something's gone wrong. This is the.
I'm going to leave. I want to leave time for questions because I know people are going to want to ask some stuff. But I wanted to ask you just 2 final questions. Right towards the end of the book, I think, as you're coming back from Japan, you say you want to try and find a game I can't win.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So one thing is, some people here will know me from my sort of activism work, of my YouTube. And when I was pitching the book around, a lot of publishers were talking, you're going to talk about your activism, you talk about your working. And I was like, no, we don't talk about that in this book. This book, we don't talk about that. I don't want this book to ever tell you what to think. Have you read Candide by Voltaire? I'm not like some Voltaire pervert.
Yeah, you witnessed my early knowledge of Voltaire. Yeah.
So it's just basically, he's challenging this idea that the world has to be this way. And he doesn't say the world shouldn't be this way. He just shows you what's happening, shows you the horrors. And he never says, believe this, believe that. And I wanted to do that. I wanted you to take you on this journey, never tell you what to think, never tell you what to believe. But this book is very much part of my activism. Not in that it tells you what's wrong. I want you to get to the end of this book and be like, I want you to be screaming, why the fuck don't you do something, Gary? Why the fuck don't you do something? Because I don't want you to be just screaming that at me. I want you to ask yourself, why the fuck don't we do something? Why the fuck don't I do something? And it's only really at the very end of the book that I want to invite the question, what do we do? And, everyone, a lot of people who probably know what I do now, I campaign against inequality. I don't want to say, oh, and then I left and I want to campaign about inequality, aren't I a lovely boy? I'll be honest with you. I'm campaigning against inequality, right? I think if I don't win that campaign, 80-90% of this country will live in desperate poverty in 20 years' time. I don't think I'm going to win.
Let's have some questions. Someone with a microphone, or how we didn't even chat about this?
I have a microphone. I will bring that over.
Hi, Gary. Like we said earlier, Harlesden, not Ilford, Chase, not City, equity, not rates. My background is very similar to yours. I was a trader in the generation before, and I traded through the Asian crisis of '98 and September the 11th. I was part of a team of 40 traders, and when the second plane hit, we were on the phone to Cancer Fitzgerald in New York. My junior, who sat next to me, heard the last words of his friend, my God, we're dying, and then the line went dead. I'd just done a massive custom trade a few weeks before, and it was of kind of bank-ending size. So the head of the trading floor ran over to my desk and said, "How much have we lost? How much have we lost?" And I looked at my sheets and I said, "I'm up $2 million," because I'd put hedges on the week before. I ran from my desk and I went to the toilet and I threw up. And I decided to quit the city because I made money as people died. So when you talk about trauma, your story resonates a lot with me. And I also come from a very hard up background. I just wanted to compliment you on what you're doing, but also give you an idea, which is that you made the money and you're now putting it to good use. It could have gone into the hands of someone else who's not doing what you're doing. So maybe that's something to reflect upon, and I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I mean, the first thing to say is I'm sorry you had to go through that. And it's the kind of thing which, you know, who do you talk to? And you've read that, you know I'm going to. There's a very similar story in my book, which is I started betting on the collapse of the world economy in 2011. And like 1 or 2 weeks later, the Fukushima earthquake happened. And 20,000 people died in the earthquake. And I made $11 million, which I put in the book is $550 per person. But look, you didn't make that happen, and I didn't make that happen. You know, I think, you know, we live in a world that likes to point fingers at the traders and the bankers and say, look at them, aren't they terrible? Aren't they the bad guys? Listen, this equality happens whether I bet on it or not, whether you bet on it or not. And you see what's happening in the world, the big increases in poverty. You know, we're living in this country now where realistically half the country can't simultaneously feed their kids and turn the heating on. I don't think we get anywhere by pointing at people and saying that's a bad guy. And, you know, people who see my channel will know I've got feelings about, you know, Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak and these guys. You know, I don't want to see Rishi Sunak hung, drawn and quartered. I want to see people being able to feed their families. So I think, I know there were people who read my book and will say, oh, aren't these bankers, aren't they terrible? And I think, you know, we're probably never going to get no progress with them. What I want to say is, things are getting worse for everyone, and we need to make things better. So,
in the kind of context of an election this year, and you know the wealth of the UK has tripled since the 80s, and yet, and obviously the sort of the policy instrument that you're kind of most associated with would be a wealth tax and finding a way to tax that enormous increase in wealth, much of it quantitative easing and measures to prop up the economy after the financial crisis that has just sloshed into property prices across the UK. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has kind of ruled it out. It's clearly too much. It's clearly kind of too strong for the kind of British political establishment. Are you still into that as an idea? Are you kind of, how do you sort of view the kind of the current political conversation around the kind of measures that need to be taken that would be meaningful?
Yeah, I'm definitely into wealth tax as an idea. You know, I try my best to be as much as I can ruthlessly pragmatic in my activism. We're not going to get wealth tax. We're not going to get wealth tax this year. We might be able to get it a couple of years down the line. What I campaign for as part of Patrick Millionaires is a 1% wealth tax on worth above 10 million. Yeah, we might get that at some point. It won't be enough. That won't be enough. That won't be enough to stop inequality increasing. I actually think the key battleground at the moment, and probably for the next 5-10 years, is not going to be actually about taxing wealth. It's going to be about getting your average man or woman on the street to understand that growing inequality is at the core of their worsening living standards. Because if we can convince enough people of that, listen, falling living standards will be the dominant political issue of the next 10 years. Absolutely, there is no doubt about that in my mind. That will absolutely be certain. And people will be demanding of politicians to improve our living standards. But they don't know what the cause of the fall is. And I'm out here saying, it's because of growing inequality, but there's a big voice out there saying it's because of immigration and because of foreigners. And their voice is currently much, much louder than my voice. And if their voice is still louder than my voice for the next 10 years, it doesn't matter what is the perfect tax, because we're not going to get any of them.
Let's have another question. Lots of hands. I'll do some random choosing. How about right at the back, as far back as you can go? Yeah.
Hi, Gary. It's Gareth. I studied with Gary at LSE, so I can verify that Gary was the smartest guy I ever met. He used to explain maths problems to me, and they seemed really simple, and I felt really stupid afterwards. And I kind of feel the same when you explain wealth inequality. When, you know, the first time I heard about that from you, and it just seemed so obvious, but to so many people, it just isn't, and it still isn't, I think. You said you were kind of pessimistic about in 20 years' time, like people are probably going to be a lot poorer, and I think like historically, wealth inequality kind of comes in cycles and often ends in revolution and war. Do you think we're going to win this battle?
Yeah, I've said a lot of pessimistic things, haven't I? So let's try and say something. And thank you for coming. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. You're very dark from where I am, but we'll chat later. And thank you for bigging up my general intelligence. My mum will be happy. Listen, I wouldn't do the work I did if I didn't think we have a chance. I don't need to be here. I don't need to write this book. I could be on the beach in the Philippines somewhere watching the thing fucking burn. You know what I mean? I don't need to be here. I think there's a massive gap, right? I think, you know, I don't think that this is a country full of heartless people who don't care. All right, I'm going to tell you one story to give people a bit of hope, all right? I got sent by a woman called Rebecca Gowland, who runs this group called Patriotic Millionaires, up to Colburn, which is in North Yorkshire, to talk to the people of North Yorkshire and a food bank about how they feel about having the richest MP ever as their MP in a cost of living crisis. And 2 days before I went, Russia invaded Ukraine, and it just totally like sidelined what I was supposed to do, because when I went there, it had become like a Ukraine donation centre, and it was full of people sorting hats and scarves and food and everything into different bags, and they were going to drive it themselves in a van all the way to Ukraine, to the Ukraine border. And I started asking around, you know, like, who are you guys? What's going on? And most of the people there, packing this stuff into boxes, were users of the food bank. So this is the poorest people in our society, right? They have, like, basically, you know, they don't have nothing to give. And yet when they see a disaster thousands of miles away, their first instinct is, how do we help? So, you know, I hear a lot of people shit on the UK, and I describe the UK in the book as, yes, it's a shithole, but it's my shithole. Listen, I know this country's not perfect, but it's my country, and, you know, I'm presuming most of you live here. It's our country. And I don't think it's full of, you know, irredeemable dickheads. I think we can be better. I think we have been better. And I think that those people in the food bank in Colburn Town Hall showed me that we can be better. And I think that it's, you know, I'm assuming most people here are not from the kind of poverty that the food bank users are, right? It's up to people like us who have the time and who have the space and who have the energy and who have the power and the influence to shape the narrative to create a story that brings these people together for positive change, reducing inequality. So the people are there, you know, and we have to find our ways to get ourselves together and provide the narrative for them, and that's why I do my videos on YouTube every weekend. It's a lot of work sometimes, but that's why I do it. That's why I get out of bed. So I think we've got a chance. Thank you.
Who's next? You've been waiting for a long while. Yeah. Should we do a microphone? Oh. It's for the room.
Cheers, thank you. This is a two-part question, I guess. The first part is, even if we have the political will, how easy is it to tax the super rich, given that they can hide their wealth through all these, you know, unlimited structures and holding companies and offshore companies? Like, how do we know who to tax? Yeah. Like, how do we find that out? And the second part is, if we do increase, how easy is it for them to get their money out of the country?
Okay, good questions. Thanks for your question. First thing I'll say is it's hard. Not easy. Definitely not easy. It's possible. We can send a man to the fucking moon, right? We can tax the rich. Second thing I'll say is, I think that this idea that the rich can leave, the rich can leave, the rich can leave. Ordinary people make money from their work. Rich people make money from their assets. Rich people make passive income. Passive income comes from somewhere. It comes from someone. It comes from you, okay? In a sense, rich people are the least financially mobile people in the world because, you can go and be a journalist in the States, right? If what I own is Chelsea Football Club, that's in Chelsea. It doesn't matter where I go. And I think, the Roman Abramovich incident kind of highlights the lie, which is actually nobody's more taxable than the rich. Of course, Roman Abramovich can move to the Cayman Islands and then he can say to Rishi Sunak, sorry, I'm in the Cayman Islands, as if we're playing tag and the Cayman Islands is like the fucking safe wall. You know what I mean? Like, this guy owns Chelsea Football Club, all right? It is clearly very easy to tax him because Chelsea Football Club is a massive fucking football stadium in Chelsea, right? And it has to send the money to him every fucking week, right? But we have a prime minister whose father-in-law is one of the richest men in the world, right? So this is the first thing, they are taxable. Doesn't mean it's easy. And the main reason it's not easy is because they control political power and they control media power. But one thing I want to say is, and I'm not at all accusing you of this, I think that sometimes people throw back at me, you can't tax them, they'll leave, you can't tax them, they'll leave, there's nothing you can do, you can't tax them, they'll leave. And what I actually hear is, don't tell me I need to be doing something because I'm really fucking busy right now. I'm getting my kitchen renovated and I know things are going to shit and I know I probably should be doing something, but I already feel pretty shit anyway, so can you just leave me alone? I think, again and again I have this argument which is on the face of it about the economy, but really it's pretty comfortable people who are just quite busy and stressed and can't be fucked to help. You know what I mean? Or sometimes it's people who are scared. It's people who are scared. And I think sometimes we think we need to argue about the economy, but actually we need to be bringing people into a space where they can accept that it's okay and that they should be trying to help. And it's not even really about the economy at all. But I don't think you're doing that. But we can tax them, and I'm going to try.
Yeah, I'm obviously all for it. My concern is it is really difficult.
Listen, a lot of things are difficult. A lot of things are difficult. And most of human history is desperate poverty. I think it's worth trying to avoid.
Question at the front here. Yep, microphone just appearing.
So you mentioned about, I was really interested when you were talking about like money being the new god after, the death of God in Western society. But I was interested in how your values changed. So what were your values before, and what are your values now, to kind of like, I guess, exemplify what your transformation was to do this work that you're doing now.
Yeah, thank you. There's one really stupid scene in the book which my editor tried to cut, and I refused to allow him to cut it, which is me going to karaoke in Japan. And believe it or not, I'm actually quite a good singer. And Gareth will tell you. But I hated karaoke. I got very self-conscious, standing up singing. I didn't really like it. And but karaoke's massive in Japan, massive. So you have to go all the time, and I hated it. And I'd been living in Japan for about a year and a couple of months, and I got invited to some karaoke thing, a bunch of like mixed crowd, some Japanese, some English. Just went up, sung fucking Wonderwall, hated it. Sat down. This Japanese guy, I remember him, his name was Hayashi, old guy, grey hair. He said, come sit next to me, come here. I went over, sat next to him. He said, what you need to understand about karaoke is it doesn't matter whether you sing well or sing badly. What matters is that your guests have a good time. And that sounds like such a stupid, insignificant thing to say, but I had just never been raised to think that way. And I think that many of us, not all of us, are raised to think all the time about, what do I want to do? What am I supposed to do? What is my responsibility to me? And after that, I started trying to sing karaoke. All I thought about was how can I make the crowd laugh? How can I make them have a good time? And I fucking enjoyed it so much more. And I think there's this crazy irony. And, you know, I don't think Japan's a country, but it has this totally different approach towards the self and towards the other and responsibility in that sense. And what I found crazy and stupid is in allowing myself to try and make others happy, I became much happier in myself, this kind of craziness. And I think, you know, the last sort of quarter of the book is set in Japan, and it's kind of this, you know, I wouldn't say it's like a total healing, but it's this kind of start of the journey towards thinking about the self as like part of a bigger thing and starting to think about ideas. There's this great scene where I sort of discuss with another trader, like, you know, should we do something? And he's like, what do you mean, should we do something? And I'm like, you know, about a collapsing economy. He's like, well, we put that good trade on. And I'm like, well, you know. And it's sort of so much of what I had in me and what I think a lot of people have, especially people from poor backgrounds. You think that's what you're supposed to do. You think you're supposed to be selfish. And I think actually it traps us in many ways. It traps us as individuals and it traps us as a society as well. So I think I just stopped being so fucking selfish. And that's not to say that you forget about yourself entirely. You know what I mean? You've got to take care of yourself. But I think there's another scene. I spoke to my Japanese junior about, like, I can't stand these fucking bankers. And he said to me, he didn't speak good English. He was like, the problem with these bankers is they have a very small heart. And I just thought it captures it so well. Like, I think when you train someone to be selfish, you kind of, you make their heart small because they can only think about themselves. And I think that it's a myth that you have to care only about yourself or about others. I think that we can do both, and we have to do both. And I think, you know, I don't want to be too philosophical, spiritual, but I think in a sense this, for me, is the core of our problem, that we have forgotten that we can think about both ourselves and others.
Question at the back. Yeah, you're ahead of me.
Thanks so much. That was fucking awesome. So you talk about the lack of morality on the banking floor. Oh, sorry, I'm Amy, by the way. Nice to meet you. Yeah, you talk about the lack of morality, and I just wonder, like, do you have any hope for bankers in that position still? And how would you go about changing the mindsets? And also, do you even think it should exist as an industry overall?
You know, thanks for your question, Amy. I don't want to treat these guys as a monolith. You know, some of my people I've looked up to most in my life, some of the most intelligent people I've known are traders and are bankers. And I do think it's a bit of a toxic space, and it gets under your skin and it affects you, and it got under my skin and it affected me. You have to have hope. The last thing in the box is hope. You know, listen, people fuck up. People do fucked up things. People do bad things. And again, it's this question, you know, what I say here, like, you know, we have to be able to accept that we can think about ourselves and about others. I think we also need to be able to accept that people can do fucked up things and it doesn't make them irredeemable fucked up people. You know, if you don't accept that about people, then how can you hope for positive change in society? Like, I think, you know, I don't want to be, well, you know, I'm not on YouTube now. So, you know, I do think it's a kind of a spiritual problem. And I think part of that spiritual problem is accepting that people can change and people can get better. And, you know, you read the book, there's some fucked up guys and you'll see, you know, and I know some of them, but they're not fully bad people, and some of them are good people. You know, it's a well-paid job. With that job, you can take care of your kids. You can give your kids a good, like, future. And, you know, there will be wealthy people here, and I won't point at nobody and say, you shouldn't be doing your job, you know what I mean? You can do both. You can do both. And I don't think every trader has to walk away. I would like to see a lot of them engaging more with the kind of stuff that I do, and I know a lot of them don't, and I know a lot of them oppose it, but, you know, I get a message email on LinkedIn, you know, we believe in you, don't tell my boss, you know.
I was gonna ask you. Tell me about the reaction so far. I appreciate the book isn't out yet, but tell me about the reaction so far from people that you've worked with, or has Citibank said anything? Tell me about the kind of. I mean, would you quite like to do an event like this on a trading floor at the end of the day? I mean, I'm interested by the reverb coming back.
You know, the truth is, I'm glad you asked me that question, because I want to say this. Most of these traders are damaged people and hurt people. I don't want to say all traders are damaged people and hurt people, but I think there's this quote, I always thought it was from Shakespeare, but it's not. It's some, like, contemporary of Shakespeare. Ambition is a great man's madness. And I think we do a disservice to young men in the way we train them to so ruthlessly search for money and success. And I don't say that saying that the lives of young women are easy, because they're not. But you know, someone like Rupert in the book. You know, you guys will read the book. Rupert's a mentalist. He's hurt, and there's this great scene in the book. Oh, I say this. I think it's great. I'll go out for a walk with Rupert, and like he just says to me, "Gary, I've got a problem." And I'm thinking, what the fuck is he going to say? As soon as I meet someone, I need to know whether I'm better than them or worse than them. And I'm thinking, this guy, what is it? And then he says, and if they're better than me, I hate them. I hate them for being better than me. But if they're worse than me, I despise them. And it's even worse. It's worse because I despise them. And this was this weird guy's fucked up cry for help, and he knew it was wrong, and he knew it was a fucked up way to live. But this guy went to public boarding school, you know, getting pissed on in the bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
no connection.
Yeah.
Obviously. But tell me about the reaction that you felt so far from former colleagues or
mixed.
Yeah.
Mixed. Some of them support the work, man. Some of them support the work, and some of them follow my YouTube and they're big fans. Yeah. And I asked them, can I use? There's one guy who in the book is Quentin Benting, okay. Yeah. And that is an absurd name. I guarantee you, his real name is funnier. Right? And he's a big fan of the YouTube, even though we had conflict in the book. And I reached out to him and I said, listen, I know you're probably going to say no, but your name is hilarious. Can I use your real name in the book? And he was like, mate, I'd love to, but no. But I'll tell you one thing that's quite funny. A lot of people said the same thing when I told them I'm writing a book. And they said, you know, God bless you, good luck to you. Don't use my real name, but you can use my real nickname, because they all go by nicknames. And can you just say that I was different from the rest?
We're short on time. Why don't we have two last questions, and we'll bundle them together, and then Gary can answer them. So we got two-thirds of the way down here on your left, my right, and then one in the front row here. Yeah, you're right there. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, Gary. To what extent do you think restrictive construction planning laws are responsible for driving up house prices in the UK? You love to talk about how house prices drive inequality, but I would argue that we can't build in the UK, and that if somehow you manage to tax housing in the UK and have the government invest that money in housing, the net impact on prices would be the same if we can't build.
Okay. So house prices and inequality, and then in the front row.
Hello, nice to see you in person. I've watched all your YouTube videos. My question is, can you demystify the rich? Because that term is used a lot. If I wanted to kind of identify them, obviously don't know them, like seeing them, but like if I talk to them and look to their background, how can I identify this person is benefiting from the inequality? Is it a multi-generational thing? Is it just a millionaire? Is it a certain like tax kind of threshold? What is the identifiers of the rich that we're kind of against, I guess? kind of.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so first housing. I've been talking about housing for a long time, and as you know, I used to work for an investment bank, and I studied at LSE, and these are both phenomenally international places. And what I can tell you about the housing crisis is there's a housing crisis in London, and there's a housing crisis in New York, and there's a housing crisis in Tokyo, and there's a housing crisis in Sydney, and in Vancouver, and in Shanghai, and in Mumbai, and in Rio de Janeiro, and in Hong Kong, and in Johannesburg. And every single one of those people thinks there's a housing crisis because of their city's planning laws. And at the same time, living standards collapse specifically for the poor and the middle class, and they explode for the rich, who increase their consumption of housing. And people are forced to move out of cities like Newcastle and Glasgow and Sunderland and Wigan and Bradford, where they've lived, their families have lived for generations, and the houses don't cost shit because there's no jobs, because there's no rich people there. And people tell me, well, it's okay, we'll just build more. And I used to live in Tokyo, which has 38 million people living in it, and houses is not affordable. I want to fucking build. I think it's a problem of distribution, and perhaps you won't agree with me. And to be honest, probably you'll get your wish, and they'll turn my hometown, Ilford, into a slum with a population four times the size of what it already is, and it's already become that way. It's already a slum, and if you want to turn the rest of London into a slum, we can do it, but I don't think it's going to make housing affordable, and I'm sorry about that. Who is the rich? This is a tricky question because obviously it's a curve, right? It's not like I'm made £2 million. It's like bam, you know what I mean? Suddenly I can go to Jennifer Lopez's house parties, you know what I mean? It's a continuous thing, right? And but I understand your question. Who is the rich? And probably one key thing is, you know, is your financial situation primarily about your work, or is it about, you know, how much assets your dad has? And the truth is, you know, I don't know your background, I don't know where you're from. If you're an ordinary person living in London, you probably don't know anyone who's really rich to be. But of course, when I was young, I come from Ilford, I'm from London, I thought like 60 grand a year was rich. And this is a bit of a problem because I say tax the rich, and people like me and people like my parents aspire to getting good jobs as bankers and doctors and lawyers. The line that I use, and I'm hesitant to use the line, is we say £10 million in assets. £10 million in assets. I think realistically this is just not an achievable goal. I don't have £10 million in assets. It's not an achievable goal for ordinary people. But the reality of the situation is it's this gradual kind of curve. But, you know, and I would just like to say, you know, I'm not against the rich. You know, I'm not against, I don't hate the rich. I'm a rich person. We clearly have societal problems with the economy. I think it's caused by growing inequality. I think we need to change the social compact. We need to change the distribution. And to be honest, I'm not even calling for redistribution of wealth. I'm calling to stop the aggressive redistribution of wealth away from the middle classes towards the rich. But it's complicated. We can use 10 million in assets as an answer. I think that sort of nicely sets it as it's not about you. I don't know, maybe you are to more than 10 million pound in assets. It's not about you and me. Although, you know, I think I could and probably should pay more taxes, especially relative to what poorer people pay. I think 10 million is a like sort of level we can get behind. The reality of the situation is complicated. But I think it's important we make people realise, I'm not talking about I don't want your kid to get a job as a lawyer or a doctor and make money. That's what I want, in fact. What I want is kids from ordinary families to be able to get well-paid jobs and afford decent homes and have families and raise their kids in security and dignity. And I think the only way to do that is to tax the very rich, which we can say £10 million in assets, but you should understand that the reality is it's a little bit more complicated. But thank you for your question, and thank you as well.
Everybody, thank you for coming, and please celebrate Gary.